Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Pause Verve. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and share it with others. Your support helps us continue bringing you more heartwarming stories. In the shadowed hush of Willow Creek, Jack Harper arrives at a crumbling farmhouse, unaware of the secrets buried in its past. Each night, an old border collie named Buddy howls at a chained barn, his cries echoing with desperate urgency. What mystery lies locked within, and why does the dog's gaze pierce Jack's soul? A chilling discovery awaits, ready to unravel. A decade-old enigma. The gravel crunched under Jack Harper's boots as he stepped out of his battered pickup truck, the late August sun casting long shadows across the yard of the old Walsh farmhouse. Willow Creek, Indiana, was a far cry from the smog and clamor of Indianapolis, where he'd spent the last decade wrenching engines and dodging memories. At 38, Jack was lean but worn, his hands calloused from years at the garage, his dark hair streaked with early gray. He'd come here for a reset, laid off from his job, estranged from his siblings after a bitter fight over their late mother's estate, and tired of waking up to the same regrets. The farmhouse, with its peeling white paint and sagging front porch, wasn't much to look at, but it was cheap, and cheap was all he could afford. He slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and surveyed the property. The house sat at the end of a winding dirt lane, flanked by golden fields of late summer corn, and a dense grove of oak trees that whispered in the breeze. A rusty mailbox leaned precariously by the road, the name Walsh barely legible. The place had character, Jack told himself, though the overgrown weeds and cracked windows suggested it hadn't been loved in years. Still, there was something about the quiet, the way the air smelled of earth and possibility, that made his chest loosen for the first time in months. As he climbed the porch steps, the boards creaked under his weight, and a faint rustle came from the shadows. Jack froze, squinting into the dim corner. A pair of green eyes glinted back, bright and unblinking, belonging to a scruffy border collie sprawled across a tattered blanket. The dog was old, its black and white fur patchy, with a graying muzzle and a slight tremor in its hind legs as it lifted its head. Jack tensed, not much of a dog person, but the collie didn't bark or growl, just watched him with a steady, almost knowing gaze. "Hey there," Jack muttered, setting his bag down. "You live here too?" The dog tilted its head, ears twitching, but stayed put. Jack shrugged and fumbled with the key the landlord's nephew, Clara, had mailed him. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood, with faded floral wallpaper, and furniture that looked like it hadn't moved since the Nixon era. He dropped his bag in the living room, already mentally cataloguing the repairs he'd need to tackle. A leaky faucet, a wobbly stair rail, maybe some spackle for the walls. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was a start. Clara arrived an hour later, pulling up in a dusty hatchback. She was in her late 20s with a quick smile and a no-nonsense braid. "Hope you're settling in okay," she said, handing him a folder of lease papers. "Place needs work, but it's solid. Uncle Henry, well, he let things slide toward the end." "Seems like it," Jack said, glancing at the cobwebs in the corner. "What's with the dog out front?" Clara followed his gaze to the porch, where the collie was now sniffing the air. "Oh, that's Scout. He came with the house, more or less. Been here since Uncle Henry passed 3 years ago. Doesn't bite, doesn't beg, just hangs out. So I'd take him, but I've got 2 cats and a toddler. Figured he'd be fine with you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Didn't sign up for a pet." "He's not really a pet," Clara said, her tone softening. "He's old, keeps to himself, feeds himself mostly. Neighbors toss him scraps. If he's a problem, I can try to find him a new place, but I don't know. He seems to belong here." Jack looked at Scout again. The dog had settled back onto the blanket, his eyes half closed, but still fixed on Jack like he was sizing him up. There was something in that gaze. Not pleading, not demanding, just waiting. Jack sighed. He wasn't heartless, just practical. And practical said he didn't need a dog complicating his fresh start. "Fine," he said. "He can stay for now, but if he starts chewing my boots or barking all night, we're gonna have words." Clara grinned. "Fair enough. You need anything, give me a call. And welcome to Willow Creek, Jack. It's a good place to start over." As her car disappeared down the lane, Jack stepped onto the porch, hands in his pockets. Scout lifted his head, his tail giving a single lazy thump against the wood. The sun was dipping low, painting the fields in shades of amber and rose. For a moment, Jack felt a flicker of peace, like maybe this move wasn't such a bad idea. Then Scout let out a soft, low whine, his gaze shifting past Jack to the far edge of the property, where an old barn stood, half hidden by ivy and shadow. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried a weight Jack couldn't quite place. A quiet hag that made the hairs on his neck prickle. "What's got your attention, old man?" Jack muttered, following Scout's line of sight. The barn looked ordinary enough, its weathered boards and chained door blending into the dusk. But Scout's eyes didn't waver, and that whine came again, softer, like a secret he wasn't ready to share. Jack shook his head, chalking it up to the quirks of an old dog. He had enough to worry about without decoding canine mysteries. Still, as he turned back to the house, Scout's gaze lingered in his mind, a quiet invitation to a story he didn't yet know he'd need to hear. Jack Harper's first week in Willow Creek passed in a blur of small-town adjustments. Mornings were spent at the garage on Main Street, where he'd landed a job fixing tractors and pickups for grizzled farmers who called him New Guy, with a mix of skepticism and warmth. Evenings were for the farmhouse, where he wrestled with a temperamental water heater and scrubbed years of grime from the kitchen. The quiet of the countryside was a balm after the city's noise, but it came with an unexpected soundtrack, Scout's nightly vigil. Every evening, as the sun sank behind the oak grove and crickets began their chorus, Scout would rise from his blanket on the porch with a slow, deliberate stretch. His joints popped faintly, betraying his age, but his steps were steady as he crossed the yard, to the old barn. The structure loomed at the property's edge, its weathered planks cloaked in ivy, the chained door rusted but unyielding. Scout would settle there, sitting upright like a sentinel, his green eyes fixed on the barn's entrance. Then came the sound, a soft, mournful whine, low and trembling, that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. At first, Jack ignored it. He'd crank up the radio, letting Johnny Cash drown out the noise while he patched drywall, or unpacked his sparse belongings. "Old dog's just being weird," he muttered, tossing a rag over his shoulder. But Scout's whines had a way of burrowing under his skin, not loud enough to be obnoxious but persistent, like a drip in a quiet room. By the third night, Jack's patience frayed. He stomped onto the porch, a half-eaten sandwich in hand, and glared at Scout's silhouette against the twilight. "Knock it off, mutt," he called, his voice sharper than intended. "Some of us are trying to sleep." Scout didn't flinch. His whine faltered for a moment, but his gaze stayed locked on the barn, ears twitching as if Jack's words were background noise to something far more important. Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He wasn't a yeller by nature, and the sight of Scout's graying muzzle and trembling legs stirred a flicker of guilt. The dog wasn't hurting anyone, just grieving, maybe. Clara had said Scout had been here since Henry Walsh died. Maybe the barn held memories Jack couldn't begin to guess at. He tried distractions. One evening, he tossed a stick into the yard, hoping to lure Scout into a game. Scout glanced at the stick, then back at the barn, unmoved. Another night, Jack set out a bowl of leftover chili, figuring food might break the spell. Scout sniffed. It politely took a single bite and returned to his post. The whine resumed, softer now, almost like a lullaby sung to ghosts. Jack stood at the kitchen window, watching the dog's silhouette blend into the dusk, and felt an odd tug in his chest, part irritation, part curiosity. On the sixth night, the whine grew sharper, almost desperate. Jack, bleary-eyed from a long shift, slammed his coffee mug on the counter and marched outside. The air was cool, scented with hay and impending autumn. Scout sat closer to the barn than usual, his nose inches from the chained door, his whine rising into a trembling crescendo. Jack's flashlight beam caught the glint of Scout's eyes, wide and unblinking, and for a moment he swore the dog was looking through the barn, not at it. "What's your deal, huh?" Jack said, softer this time, crouching a few feet away. "What's in there that's got you so worked up?" Scout's whine faded to a whimper, and he turned his head, meeting Jack's gaze. Those green eyes held something Jack couldn't name, sorrow maybe, or a plea. It wasn't just a dog being noisy, it was a dog trying to say something, and Jack, for all his practicality, felt the weight of that unspoken message. He stood, shining the flashlight over the barn. The chain was heavy, the padlock solid, with faint scratches around the doorframe, like Scout had pawed at it before. The sight sent a shiver down Jack's spine, not of fear, but of something deeper, a sense that this barn and this dog were tied to a story he'd stumbled into. Back inside, Jack lay awake, the whine echoing in his mind. He told himself it was nothing, a dog's quirk, a relic of some old loss. But as he drifted toward sleep, Scout's eyes lingered in his thoughts, bright and searching, as if daring him to listen closer. Jack Harper was no stranger to stubbornness, his own or anyone else's, but Scout was testing his limits. By the second week in Willow Creek, the old border collie's nightly ritual had become as predictable as the sunrise. Each dusk, Scout would limp across the yard to the ivy-choked barn, settle into his vigil, and let out that haunting whine, a sound that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the farmhouse. Jack tried to tune it out, burying himself in work at the garage or blasting classic rock through a borrowed radio, but Scout's voice had a way of finding him, slipping through the cracks of his resolve like water through a sieve. At the garage, Jack was settling in, earning nods of approval from farmers who appreciated his knack for coaxing life back into their ancient machinery. The work was steady, the pay decent, and the banter with his boss, a grizzled mechanic named Roy, kept his days grounded. But when Roy asked how he was liking the Walsh place, Jack's answer was curt. "It's fine. Quiet. Except for that damn dog," Roy chuckled, wiping grease from his hands. "Scout, yeah, he's been a fixture out there since old Henry Walsh kicked the bucket, always parked by that barn, whining like he's waiting for something. Folks around here just let him be." "Waiting for what?" Jack asked, tightening a bolt with more force than necessary. Roy shrugged. "Who knows? Henry was a private sort. Loved that dog, though. Guess Scout's still loyal, even with him gone." The conversation stuck with Jack, though he didn't want it to. Loyalty was a sore spot. His own family hadn't spoken in years, not since the shouting match over their mother's will had fractured what little bond they had left. He didn't need a dog reminding him of things he'd rather forget. Back at the farmhouse, he doubled down on his routine. Patch the walls, fix the plumbing, keep busy. But Scout's persistence was relentless. The dog didn't just whine, he watched, those green eyes tracking Jack whenever he stepped outside, as if daring him to ignore the barn's pull. One evening, Jack tried a new tactic. He sat on the porch with a beer, hoping to outlast Scout's ritual. The air was warm, scented with wildflowers, and the faint tang of diesel from a passing tractor. Scout, as always, was by the barn, his whine softer tonight, but no less piercing. Jack sipped his beer, staring at the dog's silhouette against the fading light. "You're not going to quit, are you?" he muttered, half expecting an answer. Scout's ears flicked, but he didn't move. The whine grew briefly sharper, then settled into a low, keening hum, like a song only the barn could hear. Jack's irritation flared. He'd moved here for peace, not to play babysitter to a dog with a vendetta. He considered calling Clara to rehome Scout. Surely someone in town would take him. But the thought snagged on something unexpected. The way Scout's tail had thumped when Jack tossed him a scrap of bacon that morning, or how the dog slept closer to the porch now, like he was starting to trust him. Jack drained his beer and stood brushing off his jeans. He wasn't soft-hearted, but he wasn't cruel either. Maybe Scout was grieving, like Roy said. Maybe the barn held memories of Henry, or a lost toy, or some canine nonsense Jack couldn't fathom. Whatever it wasn't his problem. Still, as he turned to go inside, Scout let out a single sharp yip. Not a whine, but a call. Jack glanced back. The dog was staring at him, eyes bright in the dusk. And for a moment Jack felt like Scout was asking for help, not just howling at shadows. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy. Scout's whine echoed in his dreams, mingling with memories of his sister's voice, sharp with anger, and his brother's silence. By morning, Jack was bleary-eyed and restless, his resolve to ignore Scout fraying at the edges. The dog was waiting on the porch, tail giving a slow wag as if to say, "I'm still here." "So are you." At the local diner over coffee, Jack overheard a conversation that gave him pause. Two older women, their voices warm with gossip, were talking about the Walsh place. "That dog's been at it for years," one said, stirring sugar into her cup. "Ever since Henry passed. Sits by that barn like it's his job." "Poor thing," the other replied. "Henry doted on him. Bet he's just missing the old man." Jack sipped his coffee, pretending not to listen. The words lingered, though, painting Scout's behavior in a new light. Missing someone didn't explain the scratches on the barn door or the way Scout's whines felt like a summons. Jack paid his tab and drove home, his thoughts circling. He wasn't ready to play detective, but Scout's persistence was wearing him down, one mournful note at a time. The rain came to Willow Creek on a Thursday evening, a steady drizzle that turned the dirt lane to mud and cloaked the farmhouse in a soft, grey hush. Jack Harper sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm coffee and staring at the stack of unopened bills he'd shoved into a drawer. The patter of rain on the roof was soothing, but it couldn't drown out the sound that had become his nightly companion. Scout's whine, sharp and insistent, cutting through the storm from the direction of the old barn. Tonight, though, the whine was different, less mournful, more urgent, punctuated by a series of sharp barks that made Jack's jaw tighten. "Enough's enough," he muttered, shoving his chair back. He'd ignored Scout for 2 weeks, hoping the dog would tire of his ritual, or that Jack's own stubbornness would outlast the collie's. But those barks weren't just noise, they were a demand, and Jack's curiosity, frayed by sleepless nights and Scout's unyielding gaze, finally tipped the scales. He grabbed a flashlight from the counter, pulled on his worn jacket and stepped into the rain. The yard was a slick mess, his boots sinking into the mud as he crossed to the barn. Scout was there, closer to the chained door than Jack had ever seen him, his black and white fur plastered to his sides by the rain. The dog's green eyes gleamed in the flashlight's beam, wide and alert, his barks giving way to a low, trembling whine as Jack approached. Scout's tail flicked once, not in joy but in acknowledgement, as if to say, "Finally you're here." "What's got you so riled up, old man?" Jack said, his voice softer than he meant. He aimed the flashlight at the barn door, the chain glinting wetly, the padlock heavy and rusted. The door itself was weathered, its planks warped by years of neglect, but Jack's beam caught something new. Faint scratches etched into the wood near the base, shallow but deliberate, like claw marks. Scout's doing, no doubt. The sight sent a prickle down Jack's spine, not fear exactly, but a sense that he was standing at the edge of something he hadn't signed up for. Scout nudged the door with his nose, then looked back at Jack, his whine rising in pitch. The rain drummed harder, soaking Jack's hair and dripping into his eyes, but he couldn't look away from those scratches. All right," he said, crouching to get a better look. The marks weren't fresh, but they weren't ancient either, a testament to Scout's persistence. Jack ran his fingers over them, feeling the rough grain of the wood, and glanced at the padlock. Breaking it wasn't an option, not yet. He didn't own the place, and Clara might not take kindly to property damage, but Scout wasn't done. The dog turned, limping slightly, and padded to the side of the barn where ivy clung like a shroud. He pawed at the ground, his whine now a low, urgent hum. Jack followed, the flashlight beam slicing through the rain to reveal a small, warped window, its glass clouded with grime. Scout stood on his hind legs, front paws braced against the barn wall, and let out a single sharp bark. Jack's heart thudded. This wasn't random. Scout was showing him something. He wiped the window with his sleeve, but the grime was too thick to see through. Frustrated, Jack circled the barn, searching for another way in. The rain made the ground treacherous, and he nearly slipped as he rounded the back corner. There, half hidden by a tangle of weeds, was a loose board, its nails rusted and bent. Scout was at his side in an instant, nose pressed to the gap, his whine now a soft pleading sound that tugged at Jack's chest. "Okay, you win," Jack said, kneeling in the mud. He gripped the board and pulled, the wood groaning before giving way with a splintered crack. The gap was narrow, but Jack's flashlight revealed a glimpse of the barn's interior. Dusty beams, stacks of old hay, and, in the far corner, a small wooden trunk, its lid carved with faint looping initials, H.W. Henry Walsh, maybe. Scout's ears pricked, and he nudged Jack's arm, his eyes locked on the trunk. Jack hesitated. This wasn't his property, and whatever was in that trunk wasn't his business. But Scout's whine grew sharper, almost desperate, and those green eyes held a plea Jack couldn't ignore. He reached through the gap, his fingers brushing the trunk's edge, but it was too far to pull out. Scout pawed at the ground, as if urging him to keep going. Jack sat back on his heels, rain streaming down his face, and made a decision. He'd come back tomorrow with tools in daylight. Whatever Scout was guarding, it deserved more than a rushed, rain-soaked fumble. He stood, shining the flashlight one last time into the barn. The trunk sat there silent but heavy with promise, and Scout let out a final soft whimper, his tail giving a single thump against the wet grass. Jack looked down at the dog, soaked, and shivering but unwavering, and felt a flicker of respect. "You're a stubborn one," he said, almost smiling. "But you got my attention." Back at the house, Jack toweled off, his mind racing. The scratches, the trunk, Scout's relentless focus, it all pointed to something more than a dog missing his old owner. As he lay in bed, the rain still tapping at the windows, Scout's whine echoed in his thoughts, not as an annoyance, but as a call to action. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, Jack felt a spark of purpose, faint but growing, kindled by a dog who refused to let the past stay buried. The morning after the rain, Willow Creek woke to a sky scrubbed clean, the air crisp with the promise of early fall. Jack Harper stood on the farmhouse porch, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand, his eyes fixed on the old barn. The events of the previous night, the scratches on the door, Scout's urgent barks, the glimpse of that carved trunk, had lodged in his mind like a splinter. He wasn't one for mysteries, but Scout's relentless vigil had stirred something in him, a nagging need to understand what the old collie was guarding so fiercely. Scout was already at his post by the barn, his greying muzzle tilted toward the chained door, though he wasn't whining today. Instead, he sat with a quiet dignity, his green eyes flicking to Jack as if to say, "Your move." Jack drained his coffee, set the mug on the porch rail, and grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox he'd brought from Indianapolis. He'd told himself he'd wait for Clara's permission to break into the barn, but Scout's gaze was a stronger argument than propriety. Whatever was in that trunk, it was time to find out. The yard was still soft from the rain, his boots leaving shallow prints. As he crossed to the barn, Scout rose, his tail giving a slow wag, and followed close behind, his limp more pronounced in the morning chill. Jack knelt by the loose board he'd pried open the night before, the gap just wide enough to squeeze through if he angled his shoulders. He hesitated, glancing at Scout. "You better not be leading me to a nest of raccoons," he said, half joking. Scout's ears twitched, and he let out a soft huff as if offended by the suggestion. Jack crawled through the gap, the scent of damp wood and old hay hitting him as he emerged inside the barn. The space was dim, lit only by slivers of sunlight piercing the cracked walls. Dust motes danced in the beams, and the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. The trunk sat in the corner, just as he'd seen it, its carved initials, H.W., faint but unmistakable. Scout squeezed in behind him, his claws clicking on the warped floorboards, and nudged the trunk with his nose, letting out a low, insistent whine. "All right, hold your horses," Jack said, gripping the crowbar. The trunk's lock was rusted but flimsy, and a single sharp pry snapped it open with a metallic groan. Jack lifted the lid, the hinges creaking, and peered inside. The contents were modest but telling, a stack of yellowed children's drawings, a worn leather dog collar with a tarnished tag that read Buddy, and a sealed envelope, its edges brittle with age. Scout's tail thumped once, his eyes locked on the collar, and Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the barn's draft. He started with the drawings, spreading them carefully on the floor. They were done in crayon and marker, the kind of art kids pinned to fridges, stick figure families, sunny fields, a black and white dog with oversized ears. Each was signed in a wobbly scrawl, Tommy, age 8. Jack's pulse quickened. Tommy. A name, a clue, a piece of the puzzle Scout had been guarding. The dog in the drawings looked uncannily like Scout. Same lopsided grin, same bright eyes. Jack, glanced at the collie who was sniffing the collar, his whine now a soft, almost reverent hum. Next he opened the envelope, careful not to tear the fragile paper. Inside was a single sheet, written in a shaky adult hand dated 10 years prior. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. To whoever finds this, I'm sorry. Tommy trusted me, and I let him down. Buddy was his shadow, his protector. I should have done better by them both. If you're reading this, give Buddy a pat for me. He's earned it. Henry Walsh. Jack sat back on his heels, the letter trembling in his hands. Henry Walsh, the farmhouse's former owner, had left this behind, a confession, or maybe a plea. The collar's tag glinted in the dim light, and Jack read it again. Buddy. He looked at Scout, who was lying beside the trunk, his chin resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the collar. You're Buddy, aren't you? Jack said softly. Scout's tail gave a slow, confirming wag, and Jack's chest tightened with a mix of awe and sorrow. He gathered the items carefully, tucking the drawings and letter back into the trunk, but keeping the collar in his hand. It was worn smooth, the leather soft from years of use, and Jack could almost feel the bond it represented. A boy and his dog, inseparable until something tore them apart. Scout rose, nudging Jack's knee, and let out a single quiet bark, as if urging him to keep digging, to follow the thread Henry's note had unraveled. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, casting golden light across the fields. Jack sat on the barn's threshold, the collar still in his hand, Scout at his side. The letter's words echoed in his mind. I let him down. Who was Tommy? Why had Henry felt such guilt? And why had Scout, Buddy, stayed here, guarding this barn for years after Henry's death? Jack didn't have answers, but he had a starting point. Scout's persistence had led him this far, and for the first time, Jack felt like he owed it to the dog to see where the trail went next. He stood brushing dust from his jeans and looked down at Scout. You're going to make me work for this, aren't you? He said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Scout's eyes sparkled, and he let out a soft chuff as if to say, You're catching on. Jack Harper sat at the farmhouse's creaky kitchen table, the leather collar inscribed with Buddy resting beside his coffee mug. The morning light streamed through the window, catching the dust motes that danced above the worn floorboards. Scout, no, Buddy, lay curled by the back door, his greying muzzle tucked into his paws, his green eyes half closed but alert. The discoveries in the barn, the children's drawings, Henry Walsh's letter, the name Tommy, had shifted something in Jack. What had started as annoyance at a noisy dog had become a quiet obligation, a pull he couldn't ignore. Buddy's loyalty to a boy long gone was starting to feel like a mirror to Jack's own buried regrets. He sipped his coffee, the bitter warmth grounding him as he studied the collar. It was more than a relic. It was a tether to a story Buddy had carried for years. Jack's life in Indianapolis had been solitary, work, sleep, repeat, with no room for attachments after the fallout with his siblings. But here, in Willow Creek, Buddy's presence was chipping away at that isolation. The dog's quiet trust, the way he'd nudged Jack's hand after they'd opened the trunk, felt like an invitation to be more than a tenant passing through. That evening, Jack tried something new. He cooked a simple dinner, pan-fried chicken, and potatoes, and set aside a small portion for Buddy. The dog had survived on neighborly scraps, but Jack figured a proper meal might do him good. He placed the plate on the porch, where Buddy usually slept, and called softly, Hey, old man, you hungry? Buddy rose slowly, his joints creaking, and sniffed the offering. His tail gave a cautious wag, and he took a tentative bite. Then, another, his eyes flicking to Jack as if checking for permission. Jack leaned against the porch rail watching. Go on, it's yours, he said, a warmth spreading in his chest as Buddy ate with surprising gusto. For the first time, the dog didn't immediately head to the barn after eating. Instead, he settled closer to Jack, his head resting near Jack's boots, letting out a soft sigh. Jack crouched, scratching behind Buddy's ears. The dog's fur was coarse but warm, and he leaned into the touch, his eyes half closing in contentment. You're not so bad, are you? Jack murmured. He thought of his sister, Ellie, who'd always loved dogs, and how she'd tease him for being too grumpy to get a pet. The memory stung, but it also sparked a flicker of resolve. Maybe he couldn't fix his family yet, but he could do right by Buddy. Over the next few days, their routine evolved. Jack started talking to Buddy while he worked on the farmhouse, patching leaks, sanding down splintered door frames, sharing fragments of his life he hadn't voiced in years. "Lost my job back in the city," he said one afternoon, hammering a nail into a loose porch board. "Thought I'd be there forever, you know, but life's got other plans." Buddy, sprawled in a patch of sunlight, tilted his head, listening. Jack chuckled. "Yeah, you get it." Buddy's response was subtle but steady. A wag of the tail, a nudge against Jack's knee when he sat on the porch. The dog's trust was hard-won, and Jack found himself looking forward to those moments, the quiet companionship easing the ache of his solitude. Even Buddy's nightly trips to the barn felt less intrusive now. Jack would watch from the porch, the whine no longer grating but poignant, a reminder of the mystery they were unraveling together. Clara agreed to stop by that afternoon, and Jack hung up, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. He looked at Buddy, who was watching him with a steady gaze. "You're pulling me into this deep, old man," he said, scratching the dog's ears. Buddy's tail thumped and Jack smiled, the bond between them growing roots he hadn't expected. While waiting for Clara, Jack headed to the garage where his boss, Roy, was tinkering with a carburetor. The shop was a hub of local chatter, and Jack figured he might pick up more about Tommy. He mentioned the barn discoveries casually, keeping the details vague. Roy's eyes lit up. "Little Tommy Walsh," Roy said, setting down his wrench. "Haven't thought of him in ages. Used to see him and that dog tearing around the fields, thick as thieves. Kid had a spark, always building forts or drawing pictures. Shame he left. Henry wasn't the same after." "Any idea what the fight was about?" Jack asked. Roy shrugged. "Family stuff, probably. Henry was a good man, but stubborn, kept to himself. Folks figured Ellen just wanted a fresh start." He paused, grinning. "You turning detective now, Harper?" Jack chuckled, but the question lingered. Back at the farmhouse, Clara arrived, her hatchback kicking up dust in the drive. She stepped inside, her eyes widening as Jack showed her the journal and locket. "That's Tommy's handwriting," she said, tracing a page. "And this locket, Ellen gave it to him for his 7th birthday. God, this takes me back." She sat, flipping through the journal, her expression softening with each entry. "Tommy loved Buddy so much," she said. "This secret place, he was always hiding treasures. But this stuff about Henry yelling, that's not how I remember him. He adored Tommy, even if he was strict." Jack nodded, pointing to the photo. "Buddy led me right to this. I think he's been waiting for someone to find it, maybe to find Tommy." Clara's eyes glistened. "I should have checked on Buddy more after Henry died. Life got busy." She looked at the dog, who'd moved to her side, nudging her hand. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" The moment broke when Jack suggested involving the sheriff. "If Tommy's out there or if something happened, we need to know," he said. Clara agreed, pulling out her phone to call Sheriff Lena Brooks, a friend from high school. Lena arrived an hour later, a tall woman with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes. She listened as Jack recounted Buddy's behavior and the barn's secrets, her gaze lingering on the journal. "Tommy Walsh," Lena said, flipping through the pages. "I remember him. Quiet kid, always with that dog. Ellen told folks they were moving to Ohio, but there was never any paperwork, no forwarding address. I was a deputy then, didn't think much of it. Small towns, you trust people's word." "You think there's something to look into?" Jack asked. Lena nodded. "I'll dig into old records, see if I can track Ellen or Tommy. This journal, mentions of Henry's temper, Tommy hiding. It's enough to raise questions. And Buddy's behavior. Dogs don't wait like that for nothing." Word spread quickly in Willow Creek. By evening, neighbors were stopping by, drawn by curiosity and the town's tight-knit spirit. Mrs. Ellis, the librarian, brought a casserole. Anne shared stories of Tommy's summer visits, his love for drawing and Buddy's tricks. A farmer named Pete recalled seeing Tommy and Buddy by the barn, building a fort one summer. Each story painted a clearer picture of a boy and his dog, inseparable until they weren't, and Jack felt the community's warmth rallying around Buddy's cause. As the sun set, Jack sat on the porch with Buddy, the locket in his pocket, the journal's words echoing in his mind. The town's support, Clara's memories, Lena's promise, it all felt like a tide lifting him forward. Buddy leaned against his leg, his whine softer now, almost hopeful. Jack looked at the barn, its chained door no longer a mystery, but a gateway to answers. He was in this now, for Buddy, for Tommy, and maybe for himself. October settled over Willow Creek with a gentle chill, the fields turning russet, and the oaks shedding their leaves in lazy drifts. Jack Harper's days had found a new rhythm, woven with the steady presence of Buddy, and the quiet hum of purpose sparked by the barn's secrets. The metal box from the barn, Tommy's journal, the locket, the photograph, sat on the farmhouse's kitchen table, a constant reminder of the boy and dog whose bond had outlasted years of silence. Buddy, the aging border collie, no longer whined at the barn each night. Instead, he stayed closer to Jack, his green eyes watchful but calmer, as if he trusted Jack to carry the story forward. The journal's entries, filled with Tommy's childish hopes and fears, had left Jack restless. The mention of a secret place and Henry Walsh's anger hinted at something deeper than a family spat. The locket, with its tiny photo of Tommy and his mother, Ellen, felt like a promise unkept, and the key found in Tommy's drawing burned in Jack's pocket. Sheriff Lena Brooks was digging into old records, and Clara had promised to reach out to distant relatives, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy held the final piece of the puzzle. The dog's unwavering vigil had led him this far. There had to be more. One crisp morning, Jack woke to find Buddy standing by the back door, his tail giving a slow, deliberate wag. The dog's gaze was fixed on the barn, not with the desperate whine of weeks past, but with a quiet insistence, as if saying, "We're not done." Jack grabbed the key and flashlight, his heart thudding with anticipation. "All right, Buddy," he said, pulling on his jacket. "Show me what's next." The barn was cool and dim, the air thick with the scent of old wood and hay. Buddy led the way, his limp barely slowing him as he padded to the corner where they'd found the metal box. But this time, he turned left, nosing at a stack of weathered crates piled against the wall. Jack shone the flashlight, noticing a faint outline in the floorboards, a trapdoor, its edges nearly invisible under years of dust. Buddy pawed at it, letting out a soft, urgent chuff, his eyes locked on Jack's. "You've been holding out on me," Jack said, half smiling. He moved the crates, his pulse quickening, and knelt to examine the trapdoor. It was small, barely 2 feet square, with a recessed lock that matched the key's size. Jack slid the key in, the mechanism stiff but yielding with a faint click. He lifted the trapdoor, the hinges groaning, and shone his light into the space below, a shallow crawl space no more than 3 feet deep, lined with dirt and cobwebs. Buddy leaned forward, his nose twitching, and Jack climbed down, his boots sinking into the soft earth. In the center of the space was a carved wooden box, its lid etched with a crude drawing of a dog. Jack's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a collection of treasures, a handful of polished river stones, a toy car with chipped paint, a braided friendship bracelet, and a folded letter sealed with a wax stamp. Tucked beneath it all was a small stuffed dog, its fur worn but soft, a near-perfect miniature of Buddy. Jack unfolded the letter, its paper brittle but intact, and read the childish scrawl. "Dear Buddy, if you find this, it means you're still my best friend. I had to leave, but I didn't want to. Grandpa said I couldn't stay and Mom's scared. I hid our treasures here so you'd know I'm coming back. You kept me safe when I was sad. Don't forget me, okay? I'll find you again. Love." Tommy Jack's throat tightened, his eyes stinging as he read the words aloud to Buddy, who'd climbed down into the crawl space and was lying beside him, his nose pressed to the stuffed dog. The letter wasn't just a goodbye, it was a vow, written by a boy who believed his dog would wait. Jack looked at Buddy, his graying muzzle and soulful eyes, and felt a wave of grief for the years the dog had spent guarding this promise. "You never forgot him, did you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Buddy's tail thumped softly, and he let out a low, mournful whine, as if sharing the weight of those lost years. Jack sat there for a long time, the crawl space feeling like a sacred vault, the box a testament to a bond that time couldn't erode. He thought of his own family, Ellie's laughter, his brother Mark's quiet strength, torn apart by anger and pride. Tommy's letter mirrored Jack's own regrets, the things he'd left unsaid, and Buddy's loyalty was a quiet rebuke to his years of running from connection. He stroked Buddy's fur, the dog's warmth grounding him, and made a silent promise. He'd find Tommy not just for Buddy, but to prove that some bonds could be mended. Climbing out of the crawl space, Jack carried the box carefully, Buddy at his heels. The barn's chained door seemed less imposing now, its secrets laid bare by a dog's devotion. Back in the farmhouse, Jack placed the box beside the journal and locket, the stuffed dog resting on the table like a guardian. Buddy curled up beneath, his eyes half closed but peaceful. Jack dialed Lena's number, his voice steady as he told her about the trapdoor and Tommy's letter. "We need to find him," he said. "Buddy's waited long enough." As he hung up, Jack looked at Buddy, the dog's breathing slow and calm. The weight of the discovery settled over him, not as a burden, but as a gift, a chance to honor a boy's love and a dog's faith. He was ready to see this through, for both of them. During the festival, Jack noticed Buddy's energy returning. The dog ate heartily, played with kids who tossed balls, and even trotted after Tommy with a spark Jack hadn't seen before. Dr. Patel, the local vet, stopped by to check on Buddy and marveled at his improvement. "He's like a new dog," she said, ruffling his fur. "Sometimes all it takes is getting their heart's wish." Jack felt it too, a lightness, a sense of belonging. He'd come to Willow Creek to escape, but Buddy had drawn him into a community, a purpose. That evening, as the festival wound down, Jack mailed the letter to Ellie, his hands steady. He didn't know if she'd respond, but the act was enough for now, a step toward healing inspired by a dog's unwavering faith. Tommy, too, was changed. He spoke of visiting more, maybe even moving closer to Willow Creek. "Buddy's home is here," he told Jack, "but I want to be part of it." Jack clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture easy, familial. The festival ended with a bonfire, the town gathered around, and Jack felt a warmth that went beyond the flames. Buddy's story had woven them all together, a tapestry of second chances. As the stars emerged, Jack looked at Buddy, who was lying contentedly between him and Tommy, his eyes reflecting the firelight. The barn, visible in the distance, stood, not as a relic of loss but as a symbol of what could be reclaimed. Jack's heart was full, his path clearer, thanks to a dog who'd never stopped believing. The first frost of November dusted Willow Creek, turning the fields to a shimmering silver and cloaking the farmhouse in a quiet, crystalline stillness. Jack Harper stood on the porch, his breath visible in the crisp morning air, a mug of coffee warming his hands. The old Walsh place, with its patched walls and newly painted porch, felt like home now, its creaks and quirks as familiar as the rhythm of his days. At his feet, Buddy, the border collie who'd once been a stranger, lay curled on a new blanket, his graying muzzle tucked into his paws, his green eyes soft with contentment. The barn, once the focal point of Buddy's mournful vigils, stood in the distance, its chained door now adorned with a sign reading, "Buddy's Barn," a promise of the community space it would become. The weeks since Tommy's reunion with T. Buddy had been a whirlwind of connection and healing. The festival had cemented Buddy's place as Willow Creek's hero, raising enough funds to begin restoring the barn. Volunteers, led by Roy and Pete, had already cleared the ivy and reinforced the structure. With plans for a grand opening in spring, a place for kids to play, for stories to be told, for the town to gather. Jack had found himself at the heart of it, hammering nails alongside neighbors, his solitary life in Indianapolis a fading memory. Buddy, ever watchful, had supervised from the shade, his tail thumping as if approving the transformation. Tommy had become a regular presence, driving from Lafayette most weekends to spend time with Buddy and help with the barn. He'd taken a part-time job at Jack's garage, his carpentry skills earning Roy's gruff praise. The work gave Tommy a reason to stay connected to Willow Creek, but it was Buddy who anchored him. Their reunions were quieter now, less tearful but no less profound. Tommy tossing a ball in the yard, Buddy bounding after it with a joy that defied his age, or the two sitting by the barn, Tommy sketching in a new journal while Buddy dozed at his side. Jack watched these moments with a quiet ache, seeing in them the kind of bond he hoped to rebuild with his own family. The letter to his sister Ellie had been a leap of faith, and to Jack's surprise, she'd responded. Not with a call, but with a letter of her own, tentative but warm, filled with memories of their mother, and a willingness to talk. Jack had written back, and though the road to reconciliation was long, each word felt like a step toward healing, inspired by Buddy's example of unwavering loyalty. He hadn't heard from his brother Mark yet, but the possibility no longer felt out of reach. Buddy had shown him that time didn't erase love, only buried it, waiting for someone to dig. On this November evening, as the stars began to prick the indigo sky, Jack, Tommy, and Buddy gathered by the barn. The air was sharp, scented with pine, and the faint smoke of a neighbor's chimney. Tommy had brought a lantern, its glow casting soft shadows across the barn's weathered planks. He set it down and pulled a small wooden plaque from his bag, carved with the words Buddy's Barn and 2025. "Thought we should make it official," he said, grinning. Jack took the plaque, running his fingers over the letters. "Looks perfect," he said, his voice thick. Together they nailed it above the barn door, Buddy watching with a tilted head, his tail giving a slow, satisfied wag. The act felt ceremonial, a closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The barn, once a vault of secrets, was now a symbol of community, of second chances, of a dog's enduring faith. They sat on the grass, the lantern's light flickering between them. Tommy leaned back, his arm around Buddy, who rested his head on Tommy's knee. "I'm thinking of moving here," Tommy said, his voice quiet but sure. "Got a lead on a carpentry job in town and, well, Buddy's here. So are you." Jack's chest warmed, the words landing like a gift. "You're welcome any time," he said. "Garage could use another pair of hands and Buddy'd love the company." Tommy smiled, scratching Buddy's ears. "He's still my hero, you know." Waited. "All those years kept my stuff safe. I owe him everything." Jack nodded, looking at Buddy, whose eyes reflected the lantern's glow. "He's got a big heart. Taught me a thing or two about sticking around." The night deepened, the stars bright and countless. Buddy let out a soft chuff, his breathing steady, his body relaxed in a way Jack hadn't seen before. The collie no longer watched the barn with longing. Instead, he basked in the presence of his people, his mission complete. Jack felt it too, a sense of closure, of belonging. He'd come to Willow Creek to escape, but Buddy had given him a home, a family, a reason to hope. As they walked back to the farmhouse, Tommy carrying the lantern, Buddy trotted between them, his tail high. The porch light flickered on, welcoming them, and Jack paused, taking in the scene. The barn aglow in the distance, Tommy's laughter, Buddy's contented stride. This was what healing looked like, what love could do when given time and trust. He reached down, patting Buddy's head, and whispered, "Good job, old man." The farmhouse door creaked open, and they stepped inside, the warmth of the kitchen wrapping around them. Buddy curled up by the hearth, his eyes closing in peace, and Jack knew, with a certainty that settled deep, that they'd all found their way home. The October days in Willow Creek grew shorter, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Jack Harper's farmhouse had become a repository of Tommy's past, the kitchen table now a shrine of sorts. The journal, the locket, the carved wooden box with its treasures, and the stuffed dog that mirrored Buddy's likeness. Each item was a testament to the bond between a boy and his dog, a bond that had kept Buddy tethered to the barn for over a decade. Jack felt the weight of that loyalty every time he looked at the aging border collie, whose green eyes now held a quiet hope, as if he sensed the pieces of their puzzle falling into place. Sheriff Lena Brooks had taken Tommy's letter and the barn's discoveries seriously, her calm efficiency a balm to Jack's restless energy. She'd been combing through old records, reaching out to neighboring counties, and even contacting social services to trace Ellen Walsh and her son. Clara, too, had been relentless, calling distant relatives and old family friends, piecing together fragments of the Walsh family's fractured history. Jack, meanwhile, kept Buddy close, sharing meals and quiet evenings on the porch, where the dog's presence felt like both a guide and a promise. The town's support, neighbors dropping off pies, Roy sharing stories at the garage, had woven Jack into Willow Creek's fabric, but it was Buddy's unwavering faith that drove him forward. On a brisk Tuesday morning, Lena called, her voice tight with excitement. "Jack, we found him. Tommy Walsh. He's alive, living in Lafayette about an hour away. Works as a carpenter, keeps to himself. I spoke to him. He remembers Buddy." Jack's heart leapt, his hand tightening around the phone. "He's okay. Does he know about the barn, the stuff we found?" "I told him enough," Lena said. "He got quiet when I mentioned Buddy. Said he thought the dog had been rehomed after he left. He's coming tomorrow, Jack. Wants to see the farm and Buddy." Jack hung up, his pulse racing. He looked at Buddy, who was sprawled by the kitchen table, the stuffed dog resting beside him. "You hear that, old man?" he said, his voice thick. "Tommy's coming home." Buddy's ears twitched and he let out a soft chuff, his tail giving a slow, deliberate wag. Jack knelt, scratching the dog's ears, and felt a surge of gratitude for the collie's persistence. This was what Buddy had been waiting for, all those years by the barn. The next morning, Jack woke early, cleaning the farmhouse with a nervous energy he hadn't felt in years. He dusted the table, set Tommy's treasures out carefully, and gave Buddy a bath, the dog enduring the ordeal with a dignified grumble. By noon, the yard was ready, the barn's chained door gleaming in the sunlight, no longer a mystery but a beacon. Lena arrived first, followed by Clara, both offering quiet support. Then, just after 1, a blue pickup pulled into the drive, its engine rumbling softly. A man stepped out, Tommy, now in his early 20s, with the same sandy hair and thoughtful eyes from the photograph, though hardened by time. He was lean, dressed in a flannel shirt and work boots, his hands shoved into his pockets as he scanned the farm. Jack stood on the porch, Buddy at his side, and felt the air thicken with anticipation. Then Buddy saw him. The collie froze, his ears pricking, his body tensing. A low, joyful bark erupted from his throat, and he bounded forward, his limp forgotten, his tail a blur of black and white. Tommy's face broke into a disbelieving smile, his eyes glistening as he dropped to his knees. "Buddy," he called, his voice cracking. The dog crashed into him, nuzzling his chest, licking his face, his barks turning to ecstatic whines. Tommy wrapped his arms around Buddy, burying his face in the dog's fur, and for a moment the world was just the two of them, reunited after a decade apart. Jack watched, his throat tight, as Tommy laughed through tears, murmuring to Buddy, "I'm sorry, boy, I didn't know you were still here. I thought—" He trailed off, shaking his head, and Buddy pressed closer, as if forgiving every lost year. Lena and Clara stood nearby, their eyes soft, and Jack felt a lump in his chest, the kind that came from witnessing something pure. When Tommy finally stood, wiping his eyes, he approached Jack, Buddy at his side. "You're the one who found all this?" he asked, glancing at the barn. Jack nodded. "Buddy led me to it. The journal, the locket, the box. He knew exactly where to look." Tommy's gaze dropped to Buddy, his hand resting on the dog's head. "He was my best friend. Mom and I left in a hurry. Grandpa Henry, he wasn't easy to live with, got controlling, angry. Mom said we had to go for our safety. I begged to take Buddy, but Henry wouldn't let us. Said he'd take care of him. I thought he'd found him a new home." Jack handed Tommy the letter from Henry, the one filled with regret. "Sounds like he felt bad about it in the end." Tommy read it silently, his jaw tightening. "He should have told us. I would have come back." He looked at Buddy, who leaned against his leg and smiled faintly. "But you waited, didn't you?" They moved to the kitchen, where Tommy pored over the journal and treasures, his fingers tracing his childhood. Words. He shared pieces of his story, a strained life under Henry's strict rules, Ellen's decision to flee to protect them both, years of moving from town to town. "I never stopped thinking about Buddy," he said. "But I was a kid. I didn't know how to find him." Jack listened, seeing echoes of his own fractured family in Tommy's words. Buddy curled up between them, his breathing steady, his eyes half closed in contentment. The reunion was more than a moment. It was a healing, a promise kept by a dog who'd never given up. As the sun dipped low, Tommy looked at Jack. "I want to stay in touch, maybe visit if that's okay. Buddy's home is here with you, but he's still mine too." Jack smiled, the weight of the past weeks lifting. He's got room for both of us. The reunion of Tommy and Buddy under the October sky of Willow Creek lingered in Jack Harper's heart, like a warm ember. The farmhouse, once a temporary refuge for a man running from his past, now felt alive with purpose, its creaky floors and faded walls bearing witness to a story of loyalty and redemption. The kitchen table, still adorned with Tommy's journal, locket and the carved wooden box, was no longer just a collection of relics. It was a bridge between a boy and his dog, and, in a quieter way, a mirror for Jack's own fractured bonds. Buddy, the aging border collie, seemed lighter, his green eyes brighter, his limp less pronounced as he padded between Jack and Tommy during those first days after the reunion. Tommy stayed in Willow Creek for the weekend, sleeping on the farmhouse's lumpy couch and spending every moment with Buddy. They roamed the fields, Tommy laughing as Buddy chased a stick with a puppy-like spark, or sat by the barn, where Tommy traced the scratches Buddy had left in his years of waiting. Jack watched from the porch, a mug of coffee in hand, and felt a quiet pride. He'd been the one to listen to Buddy's whines, to follow the dog's lead, and now, seeing Tommy's smile and Buddy's wagging tail, he understood the weight of that choice. Over dinner, chili Jack had simmered all day. Tommy opened up more. "I used to dream about this place," he said, scratching Buddy's ears. "Not Grandpa's rules, but the good stuff. Running with Buddy, hiding in the barn, feeling like nothing could touch us. Leaving him behind, it broke me a little." He paused, his eyes distant. "I didn't think I'd ever get this back," Jack nodded, stirring his bowl. "Buddy never gave up on you, kept your secrets safe, waited by that barn like it was his job." He thought of his own family, his sister Ellie, his brother Mark, the years of silence after their mother's death. "Wish I'd been that stubborn about some things." Tommy glanced at him, curious. "You got family you're not talking to?" Jack hesitated, then let it spill. "Yeah, siblings. We fought over our mom's estate, said things we shouldn't have, haven't spoken in years. Moved here to get away from it, but..." He trailed off, looking at Buddy, who was curled by the table, content. "Seeing you. And Buddy makes me think maybe it's not too late." Tommy smiled faintly. "If a dog can wait 10 years, you've got time." The words stuck with Jack. That night, after Tommy and Buddy were asleep, he sat at the table with a pen and paper, drafting a letter to Ellie. It was clumsy. Apologies for his stubbornness, memories of their childhood, a hope to reconnect. He didn't send it, not yet, but writing it felt like a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Buddy's loyalty, Tommy's return, it was all a reminder that some things were worth fighting for. Willow Creek, too, was transformed by the story. News of Buddy's vigil and Tommy's reunion spread like wildfire, the town's gossip mill churning with pride. Mrs. Ellis organized a community meeting at the library, proposing a festival to honor Buddy and raise funds to restore the old barn as a community space, a place for kids to play, for stories to be shared. Roy, from the garage, offered to donate lumber, and Pete, the farmer, promised to pitch in with labor. Clara, her eyes misty, suggested naming it Buddy's Barn, a tribute to the dog who'd brought them all together. The festival came together in a week, the town square bustling with booths, music, and the smell of fried dough. Kids ran through the grass, clutching balloons, while adults swapped stories about Buddy's years of waiting. Jack and Tommy stood by a booth selling homemade dog treats. Buddy sprawled at their feet, his tail thumping as people stopped to pet him. A local reporter snapped photos calling Buddy Willow Creek's hero, and Jack couldn't help but grin. The collie, once a scruffy stranger, was now the heart of the town, his story a beacon of hope.